going to get us started by taking a look at today's agenda. So yes, thank you for joining our Impact Deep Dive session today. We're really excited to get through this with you guys, and we've got some exciting topics. We'll be diving into tools and frameworks for measuring impact, how to set impact goals, measure success, and plan for scaling, all essential elements to ensure that the solutions we design create meaningful long-term change. We're also really excited to have Chris Larkin with us, who will be sharing insights from her experience in impact strategy and measurement. You might recognize Chris from the RCA DFG Academy. Chris, would you like to do a little introduction?
Yes, hi, nice to meet you all. I definitely recognize some of the names from the RCA sessions. I was the managing director for impact and learning at IDEO.org, which is a sister organization to the global design firm IDEO. And that for about 8 years was my main kind of work within the space of design and working with designers. And a lot of what I did there was supporting design teams to make sure that the impact strategy, be it a behavior change or a social change project that we're working on, was as strong as it could be within a design project or underpinning a design project. And then also how we would lead measurement and learning so that we were understanding the impact of projects and kind of feeding it into continuous improvement. And I came into that space from doing very similar work within media and communications, with BBC Media Action and Girl Effect, and to that kind of underpinning all of that, a background in research in social and organizational psychology. So it's lovely to be with you. And some of what I'll share is today's, not groundbreaking stuff, but there are tools that I know designers have found really have worked with really well and have found really useful. So hopefully it'll be something that you take from this for your own practice.
Brilliant. Thanks, Chris. And yeah, looking forward to the session today. So let's get started. If we move to the next slide then, just a quick slide to welcome everyone again. Welcome. It's great to have you here for this really important session on measuring and maximizing impact for your DFG project. If we move to the next slide then, I just want to start by running through what do we intend to get out of today's session? So what do we want you to walk away from this with? And so by the end of this session, we hope that you should have a clear understanding of why impact measurement is so important and how to apply it effectively to your projects. First, we'll explore why impact measurement matters. It's not just about accountability. It's crucial for ensuring effectiveness, fostering learning, enabling scaling, and securing long-term change. Next, we'll walk you through the impact management cycle, breaking it down into 4 key stages. We'll also look at setting clear and manageable impact goals using SMART framework, ensuring they're actionable and trackable. We'll introduce a range of tools and frameworks for impact measurement, including both quantitative and qualitative approaches. A key focus will be on measuring impact through lives improved, helping you assess the real world difference your project makes, and a key counter of impact across all our DFG projects. We'll also touch on scalability and long-term impact, considering sustained behavior change, ecosystem impact, and ripple effects. And finally, we'll define the next steps for impact reporting, introducing the Design for Good standard impact reporting template. This will help ensure consistent data collection across projects made and guide you in your planning, estimating, and tracking your project's impact. So the session is designed to equip you with the practical skills and real-world insights to maximize the social and environmental impact of your DFG projects. So if we move to the next slide. As you know, Design for Good is all about building, training, and empowering a passionate global creative community to design solutions that create direct and lasting impact for the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. This is only possible through cross-company collaboration, working together on a scale that drives meaningful change. But impact isn't just about creating a new product or service. It's about understanding and measuring the positive and negative consequences of our design solutions on individuals, communities, and the environment. And impact measurement is integral to DFG's mission and aligning with the SDGs. So when we talk about impact in our projects, we're looking at a spectrum from improving individual lives to creating ecosystem shifts and driving long-term behavioral changes. By designing with impact at the core, we're ensuring our solutions are not only innovative, but also responsible, sustainable, and aligned with our broader goals of improving all of life. So on our next slide, then, we're going to cover why impact measurement matters. And impact measurement, as I'm sure you all know, it's not just a box ticking exercise. It's a vital part of ensuring our work creates meaningful and lasting change. Let's break down why it matters. So we have our accountability and transparency. Measuring impact allows us to demonstrate our commitment to accountability and transparency, showing stakeholders we're serious about delivering on our promises. By showcasing the positive impact of our work, we build trust and credibility. It's about proving that what we're doing is making a real difference. Impact measurement helps us identify what's working and what's not. This allows us to refine our design approaches, learn from our experience, and enhance future projects. When we measure impact, we can pinpoint successful solutions and scale them to reach a wider audience. This amplifies our impact and ensures more people benefit from our work. Ultimately, impact measurement helps us ensure our solutions are sustainable and create lasting positive change. Not just about short-term wins, it's about building a better future for the long term. So in short, impact measurement is the backbone of effective, responsible, and scalable design. It's how we ensure our work truly aligns with our mission and creates the change we want to see in the world. On the next slide, then, we will look at the impact management cycle. So I'm sure you've seen something like this before, but again, just to consider the impact management cycle in our Design for Good project. The sooner you consider impact in your project, the more likely you are to focus on what truly matters. And the impact management cycle is a simple but powerful framework to help you do just that. It consists of our 3 stages: designing for impact, where you start by asking critical questions. What are our goals? Who are our stakeholders? How much time do we have? Where can we find the information we need? And crucially, how will we measure impact? At this stage, you're setting the foundation for managing your goals. For Design for Good projects, it's important to consider how your design can enable your DevOrg partners to measure impact effectively. Measuring impact, here, of course, you collect data and evidence from your stakeholders and existing sources. This step's about gathering the info you need to understand the effects of your work, both positive and negative. And then learning and improving. This is where reflection comes in. Ask yourself what went well, what didn't go as planned, how can we adjust our practices to improve our impact? Continuous improvement is key. So this stage is all about making changes to amplify those positive effects and reduce any unintended negative consequences. By measuring your impact, you can assess what you're doing and understand its effects. As the saying goes, what gets measured gets managed. So just as we would track our finances to manage them effectively, we want to do the same with our project's social and environmental impact. This not only helps us improve, but also allows us to communicate more effectively with all stakeholders. And these 3 steps create a cycle that help you report on your performance and foster that culture of continuous improvement. It's an ongoing process and one that ensures we're striving to do better and create greater impact. On the next slide, then, we have our 5 key dimensions of impact. The Impact Management Project, the IMP, has defined 5 key dimensions to help us understand the bigger picture of impact and guide how we measure that impact of our work. So let's explore each one. The what. This dimension focuses on the effects of your activities and their importance. These effects can be positive or negative, intended or unintended, and sometimes you might even discover unexpected positive outcomes. So always leave room for surprising learnings. The who, of course, is where we consider stakeholders, individuals or groups who are affected by or can influence your activities. Understanding who is impacted helps ensure your work is inclusive and addresses the right needs. How much? This dimension looks at the scale and duration of change. How many people are experiencing each outcome? How significant is the change for them? And how long does each outcome last? To know if something has improved, we need to understand the starting point. So baseline data for this question is key. Contribution. This is about understanding your role in creating the impact. What would have happened anyway without your intervention? Calculating your contribution helps avoid overclaiming and provides valuable insights for improvement. Remember, impact is defined as a change in outcome caused by your project, whether positive, negative, intended or unintended. We should measure it all. And risk. All decision-making carries risk, of course. This dimension encourages us to identify potential risks in implementing your project and measuring its impact. For example, risks might include insufficient evidence, a lack of understanding of stakeholder needs, or not achieving impact goals. And by acknowledging these risks, we can plan to mitigate them. So when you're thinking about these 5 dimensions of impact and you're applying them to your own project, I would encourage you to note down these dimensions and these questions and take away and think to yourself, who are we trying to help? What changes do we hope to see? How much change do we expect to see? How can we ensure our project is making a meaningful contribution? What are the potential risks and how can we address them? These 5 dimensions provide a comprehensive framework for understanding and measuring impact, helping us create a more effective and responsible solutions. So let's look at how we can apply this to a DFG project example. On the next slide, we just have a quick intro then to the Clean Team Toilets project that we're going to use as our case study in order to explore those 5 dimensions of impact. This project, you might have heard us talk about it in the past. It focused on redesigning a portable toilet service for households in Ghana, where 3.5 billion people globally lack safely managed sanitation and 1.5 billion of no basic sanitation services at all. The Design for Good team partnered with Clean Team Toilets Ghana to improve and redesign their service. They enhanced the customer experience, supported staff training, developed new digital tools, and designed a new one-time pickup solution, lowering subscription fees, giving staff more time off, and allowing Clean Team to expand into new areas, resulting in 1780 households having access to a toilet where they previously did not. So if we move on to the next slide, we can look at what was the impact of the Clean Team Toilets project in terms of our 5 dimensions of impact. So in this example, the project achieved improved sanitation for households, increased efficiency for Clean Team operations, and enhanced staff training in digital tools. These changes directly address both customer and operational needs. The WHO primary impacted were the 1,700 households in Kumasi, Ghana, who now have access to a portable toilet. Also impacted were the Clean Team drivers, who benefited from improved working conditions and the extra day off. And indirectly, local communities benefit, seeing improved public health due to better sanitation. The how much dimension, well, 90% satisfaction was achieved with the once-a-week pickup system, with less than 10% customer complaints. Drivers now work 5 days instead of 6, improving their work-life balance. There's improved health outcomes and quality of life for users. And our total estimated lives improved are almost 7,000, with about 8,500 forecasted for year end. Contribution, the team redesigned the service model, introducing a once-a-week pickup system with customer cartridge changes. They also developed digital tools for staff and provided training on these tools. And risk. Potential risks included customer dissatisfaction with the new system, improper cartridge usage, and the challenge of measuring public health data directly. These risks were mitigated through careful planning and customer education. So this case study here can help us visualize how we can take those 5 dimensions of impact and apply them to our Design for Good project. So again, I'd encourage you to note down the 5 dimensions of impact and consider how they apply to your own DFG project. For now, though, I will hand you over to Chris, who's going to take you through her logic model.
Great, thanks, Helen. So anyone who was on the RCA, the Academy calls will recognize the model I'm going to talk about. You can jump to the next slide, actually, please. Jump. So we talked about theory of change in that session. Whether you were there or not, we'll go through some of the same content right now, so everyone's on the same page. But this is a really standard framework in the social nonprofit sector for developing theories of change, but also for defining a results framework. And so when you're developing a theory of change, this can be really helpful for you to map out what are the activities and the resources that we're putting into something? What is it that we're putting out in the world? What is the change we're going to create? As you design on that type of a framework and really kind of think about how your solution, be it a service, product, a campaign, etc., how it sits across this type of structure, you're going to measure it in those exact same kind of structural ways. So we'll talk about what each of these is. So at the input level, you're talking about the activities and resources that you invest into a project. The output level is what that solution is. So what is it that you're putting out into the world? And how are the participants or the users or customers, beneficiaries, how are they accessing and engaging with that solution? Outcomes is actual change. So how is someone's life changing in softer or, subjective or more objective and tangible ways? So what is it that people think, feel, do differently? How is it that they're benefiting in a meaningful way? And then at the impact level, that is your much more longer term change. So what is that significant positive change in the social, economic, or environmental challenge that you're ultimately trying to work on? So we'll talk about what results look like at each of these levels. We'll use an example. Before you move on to the next slide, though, Jem, kind of linking from the framework that you just saw, the what, who, how much, contribution, risk. So hopefully you can see that the what, who, and the how much is really something that you'll try and describe around each of these levels. So at the output level, what is it that people are coming into contact with? What is that solution? Who is it that's coming into contact with it? What's who's the population you're talking about? And we'll look at how much. And then with contribution, I'm saying this so you can have it in mind as we go through each stage. Contribution is really about the link between different stages in this. So particularly from the output stage to the outcome stage, you put something out into the world, what kind of contribution or what level of contribution is that making to a shift in what people think, feel, and do? So ultimately, that's where that comes in terms of the links from one point to the next. So the two of these frameworks together can kind of help you put a structure on it. And then if you like, flesh it out almost and ask yourself the right questions to build this out into something that can help you measure. So you can go to the next slide now. So we'll take an example of a project, a health project. So, and this is a hypothetical project, but you may recognize work like this and you may have come across. So a design project with a how might we increase HIV testing and uptake of antiretroviral therapy. And so the design solution, let's say this is an awareness campaign that first of all is improving awareness and addressing stigma around accessing HIV testing or taking treatment. And then there's also a clinic experience, which is redesigning what it's like to go to a clinic and engage with something that can be quite intimidating, can be a very quite a fearful experience for people, and for something to be more welcoming and supportive and informative as well. So kind of a two-tier solution, if you like. So at the input level, we would be thinking about, what is the time, the money, the resources are going into creating this campaign or delivering this clinic experience. And as a designer, your design project, all of the investment that it takes and the time and the people it takes to do a design project would sit at this input level. You would think about the clinic improvements that you're putting into place, the campaign distribution that's happening and the design and creation of that, all of the staff it takes to stand up something like that. So that's something you would be counting, or your dev org would be counting at the input level. At the output level, go to the next slide, you're going to be thinking about how do you track the campaign itself? And that's really like delivery level. What does it look like for that to be out in the world, and the clinic experience as well? So the types of things that you might track would be reach. So what is the number of people who've seen a billboard or who have seen a message on social media? So you can count the number of people. Also people who have engaged with it. So an example of a measure of engagement would be What percentage of the people actually recall what the message was, or say they understood it, or say, yes, that resonated with me? So when you're thinking about campaigns and communications, your output level is always a count or a percentage of that kind of initial exposure and engagement. What's really important to recognize at the output level is you're not really talking about someone's life changing yet. Maybe their attitude hasn't changed. Maybe they've taken in new information. They're not actually doing anything different yet. So you're really talking about that, have they engaged? Have they have you kind of reached them with your message and with your content? Similarly, with a clinic experience, you may be counting how many people have come to the clinic. So are you seeing an increase in numbers because people are learning that, oh yes, this is actually a much better experience? Are you seeing a percentage change in the satisfaction or comfort or confidence of people who come and use the clinic in terms of feedback that you're collecting afterwards? Okay, and so then when we get to the outcome level, this is where we're actually moving in, and you can go to the next slide. This is where we're actually moving into the user's behavior and the benefit that they're actually feeling. So depending on what your goal is to create change, what you're measuring here will be kind of movement towards that change. So think, feel, do is usually a framework that I find really helpful to go through, because usually you are trying to create some change on each of these levels if you're improving a service or you're putting new information out there. So let's say at the think level, what is the percentage of people who now know more about HIV and ART and understand the treatment, understand testing on a factual knowledge level? They, are not kind of susceptible to myths or incorrect information or misinformation. The feel level in design, often the most important thing that we're trying to work on, is changing that experience. So what percentage of people now may believe it's important to get tested or to adopt ART, or part of the feel will be what percentage of people no longer feel afraid to share with a family member or to seek support from someone if they have had a diagnosis, a positive diagnosis. And then at the do level, so who is now doing a new behavior? Who's engaging in the target behavior that we wanted to see? So how many people are going to actually get tested for HIV? If the uptake of testing is super low, a shift in that could be a major success story for the project. That may be like the big thing that you're doing. Or if you've also got the goal of treatment, then you may also want to be counting, well, what percent of people after the testing are going to return to the clinic to start ART treatment? And that may be very dependent on what their experience of testing was like. If they had a bad testing experience, they may not come back at all. So you're kind of counting, based on those changes that you're trying to see. And another do maybe a longer term look at, well, what percentage are adhering to their treatment? And again, part of what you've designed maybe to help that adherence. So someone comes back and gets the treatment, but they actually continue to come back and have a prescription updated or continue to engage in kind of clinic engagement. And then at the impact level, you can jump to the next slide. So on a challenge like this, at an impact level, you would really be looking at the year-over-year reduction in either new cases of HIV in a community or a population, and you may be looking at improvement in the standard of living with people living with HIV, and that may be, a mortality metric, or it may be the fact that people living with HIV are still able to remain employed or continue their education or live a fulfilled and happy life and a healthy life and have not other kind of comorbidities, etc. So depending on what that impact goal is, sometimes there may be very specific things around how people live, or everything may be kind of trying to guide towards management of spread, etc. I would say with impact level, as a designer, very often the measurement that you're doing or the level you're involved in may not be as long term. You may not be around or in touch with a project for long enough to be at the point of being involved in measuring impact, because very often this can take quite a long time for the needle to move. But funders of this work and the nonprofits who are implementing the work will be looking at this, and they may not be tracking it month to month, but they may be tracking it on a year or 5-year basis. And that would be true kind of in terms of time of tracking for most of these. Outputs are something you can really track in real time. You put a campaign out, you can measure it straight away, who's picking it up. Whereas outcomes, some of these you can measure straight away. So have people started to come to the clinic, or is there an uptake in testing? Maybe that will start to happen quite quickly, but it could also be something that there is a time lag. So actually it takes 3 months for information to become viral and more spread across the community. It takes time for people to engage with that and sit with it for a while, to have their minds changed or feel confident to come. Or in the case of an information campaign, maybe they need to see phase 1, 2, and 3 of a campaign before they feel like, yes, actually, that's something that I will do, or it's relevant to me. So part of this, when you're planning your measurement, is to think, well, how long would it actually take realistically to see that type of shift? And hopefully in the design work that you've done, you've been thinking about the time it takes, the more ingrained a behavior, or the more stigmatized a behavior sometimes, the longer it will take to change, and the more things that have to happen to create that change. You can jump to the next slide. Yes, okay. So I think Helen, we have an example to talk about, like how you might take this into learning, but that may be coming later. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'll hand back to Helen here.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Chris. And yeah, you're absolutely right. We're going to look at specifically at learning a little bit later on. And now we're going to look at developing our impact measurement frameworks in terms of how do we get to those outputs and outcomes. What indicators can we look at, and how can we measure those? And so this is where designers will need to work closely with their dev org partner for both actual impact measurement and for helping to estimate impact, which we'll touch on over the next few slides. So in terms of developing our impact measurement framework, we'll want to create indicators, and these are measurements that capture changes resulting from your intervention. It's important to measure both outputs and outcomes, as Chris has just touched on. And so when creating indicators for your project, the key is to choose metrics, whether qualitative or quantitative, that provide the most meaningful data to your project. So it's going to be different, depending on whose project we're looking at. For quantitative indicators, phrases like percentage of, number of work well, for example, percentage of clients reached by the campaign. For qualitative indicators, consider phrasing like evidence of XYZ or positive feedback from users on XYZ. These help capture more nuanced insights such as user satisfaction or perceived impact. And by combining both types of indicators, you gain a more comprehensive understanding of your project's impact. A helpful approach is to write SMART indicators, specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. We'll touch on those more on this next slide. I'm sure you've all heard of SMART goals, setting these SMART goals in the past, but it never hurts to go back to basics and remind ourselves that these frameworks are classics for a reason, and they can really help us. So setting SMART impact goals ensures your project impact is clear, measurable, and achievable. The approach drives effective project design and evaluation. So breaking it down then, we want to set goals that are specific. They clearly define the desired outcome. For example, train 1,000 teachers on play-based learning methodologies. Measurable, identify indicators to track progress, such as number of teachers trained, percentage of teachers implementing learnings, or percentage improvement in children particular skills. Achievable, ensure the goal is realistic within your project's resources and time frame. Relevant, align the goal with your overall mission, such as contributing to SDG 4 quality education. and time-bound. Set clear deadlines for achieving both short and long-term goals. So when setting your impact goals, you can link that again back to those 5 dimensions of impact to answer what needs to change, for who, how much, and how will we contribute to that. And then you can apply your SMART criteria to refine your goals. So for example, SMART goal for that Clean Team Toilets project we were looking at could be expand the Clean Team Toilets one-time pickup service to reach 2,000 households by December 25, building on the current total. So if we move to the next slide then, continuing on looking at our indicators, once we've decided the indicators, we then need to choose the right data sources for those. And that's crucial for measuring your indicators effectively. Data sources describe how the indicator will be measured, and this can be both quantitative and qualitative, terms we'll dive into more on the next slide. There are many options for data gathering, and the choice depends on the depth and rigor that you and your DevOrg partner require. Tools from your design research phase can often be repurposed for measurement, as they're human or life-centered and engaging for participants. Look back at what has worked well for you during research. And feasibility is key. You got to make sure that your DevOrg partner has the resources, capacity, and time to implement your chosen methods. So you want to co-design with them to ensure that your approach is practical and sustainable. For guidance, when we share the slides, you can click through to the Better Evaluation Guide on methods for M&E. This is a helpful resource. In practice, we often determine indicators and data sources in tandem, going back and forth to ensure the data we gather is both appropriate and feasible. If we move to the next slide then, just to go back to what we were mentioning, quantitative and qualitative methods. I'm sure, again, that you all know the difference and know the different types. But again, to touch on those, measuring impact effectively requires a mix of both quantitative and qualitative methods. Some tools and frameworks you can use then in terms of quantitative methods, you can look at surveys and questionnaires, structured tools to capture responses at scale, providing measurable insights. For example, pre and post project questionnaires can help track changes over time and help you get that understanding of what was there already before your project. Usage metrics, tangible outputs like the number of tools distributed, hours of training delivered, or resources accessed. Observable changes, tracking measurable shifts in behavior or outcomes such as improvement in reading comprehension or other skills. And then we have our qualitative methods. So interviews and focus groups, those direct discussions with stakeholders, end users, team members to gather deeper insights into experiences, perceptions, and outcomes. Or case studies and testimonials, highlighting individual stories to showcase the human element of your impact. And this can really help bring data to life and help stakeholders to understand the deeper value of your work. So while quantitative methods are great for proving if something works, qualitative methods help explain the how and why. And it's important to work closely with your DevOrg to understand which of these tools and frameworks are feasible for your project. This, again, ensures the approach is practical and sustainable. And to support consistency and clarity across all projects, we do actually have a standard impact reporting template, which we'll touch on a little bit later on in the session. If we move to the next slide, then this is where we have we're taking a moment separately just to think about education. So we have a special note on designing for educational impact. So when you are designing for learning, instead of immediately thinking, what activity can I design? We should first ask, how will I know this learning has happened? How will students demonstrate their understanding? And if it's about knowledge, that might be through a test or explanation. If it's about doing, perhaps it's through a practical application of that learning. So we should design activities that elicit evidence of that learning. How can you prompt students to show you what they've grasped? For example, if the goal is for students to understand a concept, create tasks that require them to explain it in their own words or apply it in a real world scenario. This approach aligns with the Understanding by Design framework, which again, you can link out to. This emphasizes starting with the end goal in mind, defining outcomes first, and then determining assessment methods, and finally planning lessons. It's also crucial to move beyond the assumption with learning that distribution equals impact. Just because an educational game, resource was handed out doesn't mean children's habits or understanding have changed. True learning impact requires evidence that learners have internalized and can apply what they've learned. In short, designing for learning isn't just about telling people things, but it's about creating opportunities for them to demonstrate their understanding. If we move to the next slide then, just our last note then on our indicators, data sources. Frequency is the last component in this framework and refers to how often data is collected and reported. For instance, you might collate and analyze data weekly or at a midpoint, endpoint intervals. Frequency is an easy component to overlook, but can help organize all the data that's being collected and how often it's collected. Looking at indicators with data sources and frequency together is important so you don't get form or data collection tool fatigue. Also sets limits to help gauge success or changes in outcomes. So when considering frequency, here are some tips. Your dev org might have preferences for data collection frequency. So again, can't stress how important it is to involve them in this decision-making process. As designers, consider what frequency would be most beneficial for ongoing learning and iteration of your solution. Keep dev org feasibility in mind. Co-design a plan that aligns with their budget, capacity, and time. And some indicators like long-term behavioral changes might take longer to show progress. For these, you can think about scheduling data collection at longer intervals. It can be a plan into the future where DFG will continue to track impact with your dev org beyond the cycle. If we move to the next slide, then we're going to just touch on measuring impact through lives improved. So at Design for Good, we use the metric lives improved as a clear way to capture the breadth of our impact across our projects and cycles. So our projects obviously being very different and our cycles focusing on different things. This gives us a way to look at all of our projects together. And lives improved refers to the number of individuals who experience a meaningful positive change in their lives due to our projects. This can range from increased access to education and improved health outcomes to shifts in behavior or attitudes that contribute to long-term societal benefits. It's an extrapolation of the data that you have available and should be a conservative estimate as a rule of thumb. So we use this to provide a clear way to capture the breadth of our impact across projects, across cycles, and it aligns with our mission of improving life through design by focusing on tangible benefits for individuals and communities. And we are exploring how to incorporate ecosystems into this overall metric as well. So in practice, it works by estimating the number of people meaningfully impacted by your project's intervention, e.g. students receiving better educational materials, families with improved sanitation facilities. Data is gathered through collaboration with your dev org, combining direct feedback, monitoring tools, and contextual estimates. And stories and case studies are then used to complement these numbers, showcasing the depth of impact. So we can frame lives improved within our dimensions of impact to address not just how many people are impacted, but also how and why that impact is meaningful, scalable, and sustainable. For example, we've got a lovely little color-coded sentence here for us. If we again look at our Clean Team Toilets example, as of February 2025, the Clean Team Toilets project has improved around 6,772 lives so far by giving 1782 households in Ghana access to a toilet by redesigning Clean Team's portable toilet service, improving their quality of life, hygiene, and health. So how do we get to that 6,700 number? Well, we know that 1,700 odd households in Ghana have been reached. So this number has been multiplied by the average house size in Ghana of 3.8. So your lives improved will always be somewhat of an estimate, but to give that overarching metric across all of our DFG projects. So if we move to the next slide then, just going back to Chris's example, and Chris's a wonderful framework for us. This sort of shows where our measuring and estimating lives improved would come in. So it would come in sort of looking at your outputs, outcomes, and your longer term impact is where your measuring lives improved comes in. So in this one, we could look at, for example, if we know the awareness campaign 100,000 people saw the billboard, and 50% recall the message, we might estimate that 50,000 people have had some shift in knowledge or awareness. It's impacted their lives. While this doesn't give us a perfect measure of lives improved, it provides a credible estimate based on real-world data. It also helps us communicate impact in a way that's tangible and meaningful, even if full long-term tracking isn't possible. So I would encourage you to take a few minutes to think about the indicators for your project, and the output at the output and outcome level, and how they could help you think about lives improved for your project. So if you do want to have a little think of them, feel free to pop them in the chat. I won't pause for too long, just to in the interest of time, and I'll let you guys sort of ruminate on it while we power on with the session. But do have a little think about that and see if you can think of some to pop in the chat. If we move to the next slide, then I just want to touch on estimating impact before implementation, because this is something we're asking of you in your next submission, for you to estimate the impact of your project. And so estimating impact should be something that you do together with your dev org partner, as they're going to ultimately be who takes the lead in measuring the impact. They are the ones with the connections to the stakeholders on the ground. So work with your dev org to understand their audience and reach to help you come to a realistic figure. Also use your relevant indicators that you've identified, together with your SMART goals. And then you can use that together with things like benchmarks and contextual data. Perhaps there's existing data relevant to your project. Maybe there's a set number of children in school you know you're going to reach. Maybe there are similar projects from DFG or otherwise that can provide some useful context on the adoption rate of your approach. Maybe your dev org has insights into typical adoption rates, or perhaps national statistics can help you estimate reach. And consider also behavioral change or systemic change, thinking about indirect impact like ripple effects, knowledge sharing, or long-term benefits. With your benchmarks from step 2, consider how many users will adopt your situation, learning, or approach. And once you have a clear understanding of your objectives and estimates, work with your dev org to determine how you're going to measure the progress towards these objectives, towards these estimates. And together with them, keep refining those estimates over time as more data becomes available. Estimating impact is a really important step in communicating the importance and reach of your project prior to its implementation, prior to it going out. And so on that, over the next few slides, then I'm just going to introduce the standard impact reporting template that we have for reporting on estimated and actual impact. We will share this with you after the session. If we go on to the next slide, we can see the first page on it. It will include this how to use page. So this template that we'll share with you is for consistent reporting across all of our projects, helping us to track progress, measure impact, and identify opportunities for improvement in your project. So we'll ask you to use this format to submit all your impact updates, ensuring all sections are completed to the best of your ability. And what we'll do is we'll share it as a Google Drive document, and it's intended to be a living document. We know that these estimates are going to change. We know that your actual impact figures are going to come through at different points in time. So we would encourage you to use this as your central impact document. So if we go on to the next slide, then this is what teams are going to need to complete. So we'll look at the template and then a completed example for each slide, just beginning to focus on our impact estimates. We'll look at actuals later on in the cycle. So if we go to the next slide, we are using the Clean Team toilets as an example again. Please do note, though, that this example was filled out by the Design for Good team in February 2025 to use in this example, as we didn't have this template available back in our first cycle. So if we move through the next slide, we will begin to look at impact estimates. And so this is what on the next slide, what the template that you will be given will look at. So what we'll be asking from you is for you to outline an overview of your estimates for lives improved, as well as any other optional indicators that you want to include. And so those indicators are going to be individual to your project. It could be physical or digital materials distributed, schools or communities reached, percentage of users adopting new behaviors. And so we would ask you to fill this out with your estimates between the different dates and include any optional metrics up to 3. You can include more if you want to include more. That would be great to see. If you've only got a couple, that's fine to fill it out with the information that you have. And on the next slide, we have an example of what that might look like for clean team toilets, for example. So we can include their lives improved, where we've got that from. So households using the clean team toilets, potential lives saved if we're looking at the disease rates in the area, and water saved as well. So actually the Clean Team toilet service doesn't require any water to flush, only for hand washing. So it saves water as well, looking at flushes per person, per household, per day. And so that's an example of one completed, this being a water project. So yours will look a little bit different for education, but hopefully it gives you a little bit of an idea for what we're looking for. If we move to the next slide, then we'll now turn our focus to thinking about scalability and long-term impact before we open for questions. So scalability refers to the ability of a project or solution to expand and be replicated effectively while maintaining its impact. So when designing a project, it's crucial to think about both impact and scalability from the start. This way you can identify potential barriers and solutions early on and share lessons learned and best practices as you progress. So scaling a project effectively requires careful consideration of several key factors. Effectiveness is a solution delivering measurable impact. Without proven results, scaling won't achieve the desired outcomes. Adoption are local communities and stakeholders willing to use and promote the solution. Buy-in from the people it's designed for is essential. Sustainability, can the solution continue beyond your direct involvement? It's important to ensure your project can thrive independently. Resources, are the right resources, such as funding, partnerships, infrastructure, whatever your project needs in place to support expansion. And adaptability, can the solution be adjusted to different contexts while maintaining its core impact? Flexibility is key for scaling across diverse settings. And so on the next slide then, when considering the scalability of your project, it's important to ask the right questions to ensure a smooth and effective expansion. So some key questions to guide your thinking: is scaling feasible? What aspects are replicable in other contexts? Or are there any elements that might limit that? What are the best potential communities, regions, geographies that could benefit from your project? If it is feasible, how could we scale? Are there other partners we might want to engage? Is there a way we can digitize the solution to make it available more widely? And if we were to do that, what resources would be required? What additional funding, designers, or staff materials would be needed to scale the project? And do we have those? These questions help you assess the practicality of scaling and identify the steps needed to achieve it. By addressing these considerations early, you can plan for a sustainable and scalable solution. And so thinking longer term, measuring long-term impact, as Chris sort of touched on earlier, goes beyond initial outputs to assess whether your project has created sustainable change. So key metrics to consider are sustained behavioral change. Are users still engaging with your solution months or even years later? This shows whether the impact has lasting relevance. Ecosystem impact: has a project influenced policies, organizations, or industries? This reflects its broader societal or systemic impact. Improved quality of life: are there health, education, or economic conditions improving as a result of your project? This measures tangible benefits for individuals and communities. And ripple effects: has the project maybe inspired similar initiatives or partnerships? This highlights its ability to catalyze further change. And so in relation to your Design for Good project, we will continue to engage with your dev org to track impact for up to 3 years following the handover of your project. On a case-by-case basis, we may choose to track the impact for longer. And of course, it depends on the nature of your project, what is appropriate in terms of impact tracking. And we'll keep you updated on that, on any major developments with your project, and we'll publish findings in our annual report, ensuring transparency and accountability. And so that brings us then to our Q&A section. So I'm conscious we have thrown so much information at you in the last hour. I hope it's been helpful and has been going in a little bit. Does anyone have any questions they want to jump in with? I'm sure I saw a question for Chris that came up a little bit earlier on.
So I think it was a really nice comment from Kate. So she said the digital components of a service seem easier to track, but how might you best track some of the more tangible elements here in your experience? For example, the percentage of people who have seen a billboard or the percentage of people who already know more about HIV and ART.
Yeah, so when it comes, so depending on the, let's talk about a campaign, depending on the size of your campaign, if you're doing a community level campaign, you may try to go out and do some kind of a representative sampling of people in the community to get that estimate. If you're doing a mass media campaign, you're trying to do it on a much bigger scale. And again, getting those kind of estimates does require some kind of representative sampling. So depending on all of it is really dependent on feasibility. So what resources you have to do measurement, what percentage of your project budget is allocated to M&E, monitoring and evaluation. And so a dev org partner, depending on the size of the partner, may have approach systems and processes for doing that kind of measurement or not. Obviously, if you're doing something digital, what's great about that is that measurement is built in. But if you're doing something through traditional media like billboards or radio, the measurement is a bit harder. There is ways, Helen talked about kind of doing certain kinds of extrapolation or what we might call proxies in the measurement world. And so if you were putting something out on radio, the radio station you're going out on will often have estimates of how many listeners are tuned in at certain times and what certain ad uptake is like. And so you may be able to use proxy measures like what those, what is the average listenership for an ad about something else, car sales, for example, and then be able to say, well, if we assume this and we're conservative, we can take a measure and say we think this many people were reached. So yeah, it's really around the methodology that you might use and sampling. So an evaluator or a researcher, someone who's been working and monitoring would be able to kind of support you and say, okay, what feels like a reasonable way to design this so we can be pretty confident in a figure. But it is much harder once you get away from digital in terms of campaigns. When it comes to clinics, you have a much more contained population, so you know who's come to the clinic, and so it's much easier to design a kind of a feedback mechanism that again doesn't have to be the entire set of people who come through. When you get to outcomes, it's all about sampling and subsamples. So you may count 100% of the people who come through the door and have a test because the clinic will have those records. And then maybe you're saying, look, we want to sample 2 out of every 10 people who come through the doors and see if we can get a feedback survey completed from them and understand afterwards what happens. And that's where co-designing with your DevOps partner, or in this case, say the clinic itself, to say, well, how can we build into the workflow that we're designing for you as the clinician or the receptionist, whoever it is that you're kind of working with, how can we design a process where you can ask a particular client who's been through if they would be open to doing a follow-up, and you may randomize that, which would be a very reliable way of doing the measurement because you're randomizing anything can make the data more reliable. It's less subject to bias. Or if it's not possible to randomize, you may have people self-select and say, yes, I'd be willing to answer follow-up questions. And that's a little less reliable because there's a bias there, because people who say, yes, I'm open to answering, maybe a certain type of person who will give you a certain type of answer. So that's why randomizing in these small experiments. But yeah, a lot of it does come down to kind of trying to get some kind of a small study model. But usually a dev org partner, again, it really depends on the size and the resource that they have, may have methods that they've used to do these measures before. And so working with kind of the best processes that they have on the ground is kind of usually going to be your starting point for working that out. Hope that answers the question.
Fantastic. Thanks, Chris. Wonderful. We maybe have time for one more question. I'm so sorry we're so tight on time. Does anyone have any other questions they want to jump in with?
Um, Hi, Helen and Chris. First thing first, thank you so much for giving a speech today. And you guys' insights are very, beneficial to all of us. So, I guess my question is, we're developing a classroom game and designed to immerse students in social roles, events, enabling them to engage in, and debate to defend their right to propose innovative changes to principles and laws, just trying to get them more aware of the society, the governments. So my concern is that whether the game approach might trivialize serious social tragedies, and how we can balance the games um the fun and function. I mean, the fun could be the entertainment value, function could be the educational value. So how we balance that, how we measure that. So I think it's a bit, because we don't want to it's a serious issue for to get students more aware, right?
Yeah. Chris, I don't know if you had any thoughts you wanted to jump in with.
Yeah, if I understand your question, it's about what is the balance of measuring the engagement, so how much they enjoy it and want to use it and feel like it's a nice experience to use, and then the measuring the actual change in behavior.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that they are equally important because, especially as the designer, if you want to understand the how and why of if a redesign or a new innovation is working, you actually have to understand that experience and engagement part, because that's your mechanism for learning, essentially. If someone comes to it, they enjoy it, they're engaged with it, the likelihood of learning is going to be much higher. So there's lots of research that's out there in the world on that. So in terms of balancing the weight of measurement, I feel like the same method you'll use to track enjoyment, because you've got to either talk to someone in an interview or you've got to do some kind of observation, but usually there'll be some kind of interaction. You're in the same moment, you're able to measure both the level of enjoyment and engagement, and you're able to ask questions or try and identify the learning. So I would almost say treat them the same and build both into the way that you're measuring. And if you're talking about kind of the number of questions that you ask, well, you might ask slightly more things about the learning, because there's probably a few different dimensions to learning that you want. So yeah, I'm not sure if that helps. It's a little like how long is a piece of string type question, because it depends on the learning piece and how many educational outcomes there are could kind of drive how much you need to measure on that end. But generally, I would be building both in to the measurements, so you're confident about both.
So building the level of enjoyment and building the level of the education, right?
Yeah, and in that framework we looked at, the enjoyment is going to be output level and the learning is going to be your outcome level. So you kind of need both to know the contribution as well, to understand and say, yes, the design of the way we designed it led to the learning. You actually need both measures to tell that full story.
Okay, thank you so much.
Okay.
Fantastic.
And I just add on that, and Helen spoke to it, qualitative, when people think about measurement sometimes and impact, their brains immediately go to quant, and qualitative measures, if you don't have the resource to do it, qualitative can be just as rich or as reliable as data. And sometimes it's actually the better way to do it, especially if you're measuring something that's more subjective, like a mindset change or a type of learning. qualitative may be the way that's actually much better and more reliable to do it. So yeah, always explore that as a route.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kristen, and thanks for your questions, everyone. If you do have any other questions that you want to fire through to us, feel free to drop us an email. But I'm conscious, thank you all so much for staying on an extra 5 minutes. We'll share the last slide and we can get you on to continue with your busy days. I just wanted to quickly go through your next steps. So your next submission, the project plan and video, is due March 20th. As part of this, we're hoping you'll use your learnings from today to work with your dev work to estimate your project's impacts using our DFG standard impact reporting template. This is a living document that will be updated for the remainder of your project, as we touched on, and we'll share that with you. We'll share that with you after today's session. So a recording will go up after the session also. This is going to come at the start of next week, and we'll get this template out to you shortly. On the last slide there, just to reiterate again, any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns following today's session, please drop us an email at any time and we will support you as best we can. And just a closing question, we don't have time to sit and go through it together as a group, but I want you to think the best way to understand if learning is landed is to see if you can take this learning and apply it elsewhere. So have a think about what you've learned today and think about if you can take any of this back to your day job and you can apply that learning there. If you want to drop me an email and let me know your thoughts on your my earlier question about your outputs, outcomes, and lives improved for your project, please, drop me an email. I'd love to hear it. Otherwise, thank you so much, everyone, for your time. Thanks for staying on the extra 5 minutes, and have a wonderful day. Thanks, everyone.